Hi there, folks. I'm going to start speaking about a topic which is somewhat close to my heart. A couple of months ago, a young lady called Chi got in touch with me, and she wanted to interview me about some of my thoughts and feelings about social services. And she gave me a list of several different questions to address. And we did the whole thing by Zoom, but for some reason, the sound quality of the Zoom meeting, the recording was pretty terrible. So, what I said I would do is to go back and make some videos of my own that covered the topics that we talked about. But the thing was, although she said to me, I don't want you to talk about your experiences, I want you to stay as distant from that as you can. But really, that's absolutely impossible. It really is, because the things that I experienced, of course, colour my perceptions, thoughts, and feelings about everything to do with social services. So I tried my best, but I think really, if you want to watch the videos that I'm going to make about that, then you have to know what happened to me in the first place. So I will get into that. But before I start, there are a few things that I want you to remember throughout this video. And number one, I have never been arrested and I've never been charged with a criminal offence. So when it gets to the latter part of this, you need to remember that I did absolutely nothing to deserve what happened to me. I've actually never lost custody of my children, despite the council trying their best to do that. I've never actually been sectioned or diagnosed with any mental health disorder. But you'll see that's the angle that the council used to try and remove my children. And because they had no proof of it, they were never able to actually do that. So as much as they claimed and said that I was this, that, and the other, they never had any proof and they were never able to do anything. So anyway, at the start of this story, I was age 35, and at 7 months pregnant, I leave a partner who is becoming increasingly abusive. The only reason I really realise that he's abusive is because I've read in some leaflets that I've got while I was pregnant that abusive behaviour gets worse during pregnancy, and in fact that's exactly what happened. At 5 months pregnant, I decided that I was going to leave him, and because of my disabilities, it took 2 months to prepare everything for that. And since he actually told me that if I tried to leave while he was at home, he would call the police and tell them that I was stealing his things, I had to arrange all this in a very clandestine way. Anyhow, so I realise that I'm going to be a single parent, but I also have the aspect of being disabled because I have psoriatic arthritis of the spine and chronic migraine of about 13 episodes per month. I go back to London, I get myself a place in a hostel eventually, and then I managed to find a flat in Catford. Now, my baby daughter is just a few weeks old when we move in. At this point, it's November 2008. So here we are, and I'm showing you these photos with our features blocked out because that is the way that social services would like all my photos to be. At this time, I got in touch with an organisation called Disabled Parents Network, and at this time, in all honesty, I was quite middle class and naive. Before I got sick, I was a lecturer in a computing department, and really, a lot of my opinions of things, I'd never had that contact with social services or been treated the way that I ended up being treated. And it was all a massive shock to me that social services didn't do what they're supposed to do and help people out. If you go to them in need, they'll just give you a good kicking, basically. So I spoke to Disabled Parents Network, and I was persuaded that everything would be okay if I called Lewisham Social Services and asked for an assessment for some care. My feeling at that point was that I just wanted to be the best parent that I could be, and I was likely to need some help. Now, Lewisham insisted that half the funding for my meagre 10 hours of care a week came from children's services. This actually contravenes government guidance, which says that services for disabled people must be provided through adult social services, even if it is to do with caring for their children. This might explain, actually, why children's services kept wanting to take the task of parenting away from me and give it to other people. Anyhow, when things first started out, even though it took me a while to get the care, when the care first started, I was well known in terms of the council and the social workers, and we were all getting on very nicely. In fact, this is a photo of me and my daughter in the local free magazine that went to everybody in Lewisham Borough, because I used a way of funding my care that's called direct payments, and the council wanted to promote this kind of method of getting your care. So you can see the council had no qualms about publicising me and putting my face and my daughter's face in public. And, they didn't seem to have any worries at that point. Only later on, when I got publicity about what they did to us, all of a sudden it was, if I put myself on the internet, I was putting myself at risk from paedophiles and all that kind of thing. Very convenient, really, huh? So at this point, we were being visited every 6 weeks by a social work assistant from Children's Services. Very quickly, I start to see that things are... I'm not a service user, I'm a suspect. They seem insistent on taking my daughter out of my care rather than helping me parent. So an example I would give is that if I want to take my child to the park, instead of sending somebody to help me, they would rather supply somebody who can take the child to the park for me. That's not what I wanted. I wanted somebody to help me whilst I was at the park, to do the things that I would do, like lifting her on and off equipment. But actually, I never got the chance to do that at all. In fact, my needs were completely neglected. So anyway, they start to do things like offer hours at a nursery of their choice. Now, the reason I wanted to use direct payments was so that I could have choice of the kind of childcare that I wanted. But they said they wanted to use this particular nursery. Well, you can imagine what this nursery was like. It was really horrid. It was bristling with CCTV cameras. My daughter kept returning with her knickers in a plastic bag because they had not changed her nappy in time, and then they would complain that she drinks too much and stuff like that. So you can see where this is going, and I put up with it for 5 weeks, and then I said no more. This is my beautiful little daughter at the time. As you can see, very well cared for. So yeah, at the 5-week mark of using this nursery, I said, that's it. I don't want to send my daughter to this nursery. It's not nice at all. And a few weeks later, I said to our carer that we were going to go away for the weekend, and I would call them when we get back to pick up where we left off. And since I was paying for the care from my budget, as in the direct payments money, that seemed perfectly acceptable to me. While I was away, my mobile phone rang, and it was a social worker wanting to know where we had gone. And the implication of this was that I was They didn't say this at the time, but they thought I was running away somewhere or something odd like that. And it didn't matter what I told them. They were ringing me every few hours just to check where I was and so on. So I'm told that when we return, I'm going to have to complete a Section 47 assessment. So later on, when I got all the records from this time, I found out that they'd actually reported me to police as being a missing person. So I had no idea why they were doing this. Later on, what you have to realise is that the abusive partner that I'd left was actually talking to social services behind my back and telling them all sorts of fibs. But this seems to happen a lot to people, that even though it's fairly obvious that most abused people are female, the person who's been doing the abusing is usually far more confident and seems sorted in their life because they've basically been kicking the shit out of the person they've been abusing. So they are not so confident and blasé about things. So anyway, I realised that I wanted to know what was going on. I could tell that people around me were behaving very strangely. They'd done this Section 47 and they had concluded that I was a good parent and they had no concerns about Rosie, but they wanted me to have a mental health assessment. I did have that and I passed it. They were concerned about some of my interests, for example, finding out that I was interested in UFOs and David Icke and stuff like that. But the psychiatrist saw it for what it was, and she wrote on the reports that I was interested in X-Files type stuff, which is how it should be. So I asked for a copy of my records from both departments, the adults and the children's department, and they delayed and stalled on providing me with a copy of these for almost a year. When I got them, there were some really shocking and disgusting things that I read in there. Basically, I found out from these notes that our carer was being asked to write weekly reports about my behaviour. My social worker was calling them all of the time and asking how I was. All sorts of things were being made out by my behaviour. Things so ridiculous, like I'd said to the carer on one morning that I'd like to perhaps one day go, go on an internet dating website. And this was written in the notes as though I'd already done it and I had a string of men coming round to the house. So you can see how this kind of thing just got blown out of all proportion. Nothing was happening, but they were making a mountain out of a molehill. And a social worker called Richard Hodgkiss, who was involved in our initial assessment from Children's Services, was reviewing my Facebook page several times a day, along with my contributions to the Disabled Parents Network forum. This is a copy of that record, and you see it says 28th of February 2011, Richard said that she is a regular user of Facebook and he often sees her on there. He said she sometimes goes on there twice a day. So I really wasn't very pleased with what was happening, and I started to go about getting publicity for it, and I realised, of course, there were other parents in this condition. I've always been politically activist, so this wasn't anything new to me. But this was when the really bizarre stuff started to begin. And there are other people I know that have had this kind of thing happened to them. It's very odd, and there aren't many people that experience it, but they are normally people that meet my sort of criteria. So they are parents who fought back against social services, parents who've got themselves quite a bit of publicity. And what generally seems to happen is that social services get in touch with Kate, which is the child abuse investigation team at the council. And of course, that's a department of the police. So this is when really bizarre and freaky stuff started to happen. My neighbours started to treat me strangely, as if they were afraid of me, which was really horrible because I previously got on very, very well with my neighbours. It was devastating, actually, all of these things that happened. The first thing that really struck me was that my mail started to arrive and it had been opened, and they hadn't even bothered to, make it look as if it was made to look obvious, really. And you'll see from the rest of the things that I'm going to say that, in fact, the aim of it was to make it look obvious, so I would start talking about it, and then they could say that I was paranoid. I did try to talk to the neighbour that was upstairs from me about some of this, and I kind of tried to tread gently, and she turned around halfway through it and she said, "If you're suicidal, you should go to the Samaritans." And I hadn't mentioned anything about being suicidal or upset. And this was really out of the blue. So this gave me a little bit of a window into what sort of things had been said to her and who might have said them. The other thing that started to happen was when I posted things online about what was happening with the council, they were removed. They got removed from Mumsnet. They got removed from various different websites, and they got removed from the Disabled Parents Network forum too, which was really odd because I was volunteering for them, and obviously that had to come to an end because they really started stabbing me in the back too. What happened next was the worst 18 months in my entire life. It soon became clear that for the crime of publicising the name of Richard Hodgkiss, who was a public servant anyway, and frittering away taxpayer money by sitting on his computer all day, spying on service users, that basically I'd been put under some kind of police surveillance. And no matter what I tell you about this, it will never ever be enough to explain to you how terrifying this was. Basically, I could be sitting there 11:30 at night and post something on a public forum, and within 5 minutes it was removed. And obviously I have proof now through the records that I've got that this was them doing that. For them, this was not a real concern for my child. It was a game of what I call kick the hippie. They didn't like me. They didn't like that I'd said stuff about one of their employees. And the aim of it was that if I complained about what was happening to me, then this would make me look like I was grossly paranoid and probably schizophrenic. And in fact, this is what they did. They told everybody that knew me that I was a paranoid schizophrenic and that I was likely to be violent. So at this point, I'd like to remind you of what I said in the very beginning. I've never been arrested and all of that other stuff. And that's still the case. Despite all the things that I've been through, I have never cracked or been violent to anybody or anything, despite the fact that most people would have behaved like that under these circumstances. Some of the things that happened to me, like when we would go out, they would come into my flat and break things. I lost an incredible amount of money, and I could sit there and watch them move the mouse around on my computer. And it was really awful. People would not believe that it was happening either. Anyway, so more subject access requests, which is how you go about getting copies of your records. I had to go to court in order to get various records from Lewisham Council that had been hidden from me. And all sorts of things have been happening behind my back. I probably didn't even get the extent of the records because I'm sure they have hidden more from me, and especially things in relation to the police. I was able to confirm that, unknown to me, the council had been having what they called strategy meetings with the police about me, and actually I was mentioned in what are called violence to staff meetings, even though I'd never been actually violent to any of their staff. If naming a public servant is violent, then I guess I do meet that criteria. But actually, I think, these people's names were in the public arena to start with. The other thing that happened was that even after I set my Facebook page to private, Lewisham was still managing to reproduce my status and use it to justify their bullying. So things that I said on my Facebook page, maybe even as a joke, were used by them to suggest that I was, absolutely crazy, mad, schizophrenic, and violent. I also found that they had been contacting my GP surgery behind my back and been talking to them and telling them that I was basically off my trolley. This resulted for me in a decline in the standard of my healthcare. This meant that sometimes I couldn't get prescriptions that I needed, and they regarded us as what they called a troubled family. So some of the things that they said about me in the notes, for example, when I lost my pregnancy weight, it was written in my notes that this was possibly because I was a drug addict and I was on some kind of drugs that made me lose weight. And in fact, sometimes I spoke very rapidly, and that was a sign that I was taking drugs too. There were all sorts of different things that were completely false. There was a comment, and it's reproduced below from my notes. They said, the most recent posting on the internet we have spotted is comments about the right to bear arms. Obviously, of course, this is gun laws in America, right? We're not allowed to have guns in the UK. And they said that while she has no known history of violence and we are not aware of any access to weapons, the level of paranoia she is experiencing, coupled with comments about the right to bear arms, is somewhat concerning. So all these people who say, it doesn't matter, I have nothing to hide, the government can read all my emails and Facebook and whatnot, you never know what they're going to make of what you write. So, my comment about gun laws in America has probably resulted in me being put on various lists and blacklists and so on. That certainly seems to be what has happened. I mean, I can't even go to the dentist without being treated weirdly, and people often seem to be afraid of me. I'm a little 5'1" and a bit hippie with a walking stick. I'm nothing to be scared of, and it makes me very sad that even though I've been to court and so on, I can't get what's already on my records changed. So unfortunately, all that stuff is still there. There's still flags on my children's medical records to say that they've been investigated by social services and so on, and that there's a risk there. There's also in their records constant hints that I may not really be physically ill. And I'll tell you, there's notes made. For example, one time a social worker came to visit me and I was doing some sewing. Not only did they say that I was repairing underwear, which it was actually like a long skirt, which was kind of a petticoat type skirt, but that was said to be underwear. But they were commenting, how can I be sewing and using my hands? But the fact is, I have arthritis of the spine. At that point, it didn't affect my hands very much unless I was required to do something like um, kneading a loaf of bread. That would make my hands tired, or grating cheese or something like that. Okay, so I was constantly under suspicion that I wasn't even really disabled. And when they told this to my GPs, as I said previously, I was unable to get treatment for my arthritis. And you can imagine, with the stress that I was under, what that did to my health. It made my health really bad, and I had terrible flare ups, and I wasn't able to get the medicine that I needed. So basically, there was a lot of fun and games with Lewisham. This really ended, as in the very serious part of it, with the police harassment in 2013 in the spring. Our landlord suddenly issued us with a no fault Section 21 eviction notice. He said he wanted to sell the flat. I think he probably got tired of the police asking him to do this, that, and the other, because they wanted to do various things to the flats. They did do certain things. I won't go into it in this video because it will get too long otherwise. But they did some really dreadful things, and they used him as an excuse, that they wanted to send a gas engineer around, or they wanted to inspect the electrics or whatever. It's constantly people in and out of the flat. And leaving London, as much as I love London, I do miss it dreadfully. It was really our only option, and it was the best option in terms of starting legal action. So if you want to look into the laws that make this kind of intrusive surveillance possible, it's the REPA Act, which Tony Blair brought in after 9/11, and that gave public bodies the capacity to spy on terrorists for the prevention of terrorism. But basically, it's enabled councils and police to do exactly this type of surveillance on ordinary citizens. The excuse in my case being that I was a neglectful parent, or maybe even abusive in some kind of way. So even though I succeeded in winning a lawsuit against Lewisham, I was unable to get the records changed. I am still involved in legal action, which has been nearly 8 years now, against the Metropolitan Police. And the last that I've heard on that front is that they claim to have destroyed all of my records, which I don't think for a moment is true. But there we go. So in the future, I will be doing more about what the police actually did to me. Because, of course, they were all friends with Richard Hodgkiss. And I've had some really appalling things happen. Like one time I was out and a policeman pulled up in his car and he actually wound the window down and laughed in my face. So, yeah, it's certainly not my imagination. And anyway, I will get on with the bits that I promised to do for Chi and answering those questions.